So we're going to look at applying a grid to our drawing paper. Now, when you submitted your image references, you also had to submit the size of your paper you are working with. I'm going to go over two very popular sizes. The first is going to be 9 by 12, and the second one will be 8.5 by 11. So I'm going to need a ruler. I'm going to need, of course, my drawing paper and my pencil. Now, anytime we make a grid on our drawing paper for a drawing, we want to make our lines very light. Eventually, the grid goes away. We very rarely ever keep the grid for anything when we are creating one on our drawing paper. I'm going to start with my paper in portrait view. And near the top, I'm going to line up the 0 of my ruler to the left edge of my paper. And I'm going to make a mark every 1 inch. So this is for a 1-inch grid on our drawing paper. Realize that anytime you make a grid, you will of course make the increments of the measurements according to what is required. So if you're required to have a 1/2-inch grid on here, you would mark every 1/2 inch, like the 1/2, the 1, the 1.5, the 2, the 2.5, the 3, and so forth. We are working with a 1-inch grid on this paper, so I'm just going to mark every inch. Anytime you make a grid, you need 2 reference points to make sure your lines are straight. So I make marks at the top, and then you never want to turn your paper, just in case it's slightly less than the full 9 inches. Sometimes when you get paper from a manufacturer, it is slightly less that measurement, or sometimes when you cut it yourself, the paper could go slightly askew while you're cutting in a paper cutter. So once again, now that I moved my ruler to the bottom, I'm going to line up the 0 on the left edge, and I'm going to mark every inch. Once I have those marks made, then I'm going to take my ruler, and now it is vertical. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw very light lines matching up that top mark to that bottom mark. I apologize, my audio kind of cut out on me here. So this is the next process, is each mark I made at the top, I'm going to line up to a mark at the bottom. And it's very important that you make very light lines with your ruler and pencil. So I have my paper divided into 1-inch segments while it is in portrait view. To create a grid, I need to turn my paper 1/4 of a turn. I'm moving my portrait view into landscape view, and I'm now going to make my 1-inch increments while the paper is in this viewpoint. So once again, I'm going to line up the end of my ruler to the left edge of my paper, and I am going to, at the top, make marks every 1 inch. Now that I have the marks at the top of my paper, I'm going to move my ruler once again to the bottom of my paper. Again, do not turn your paper, move the ruler instead. And once again, line the 0 up to the left edge and mark every inch. Now that I have those marks complete, just like before, I'm going to use my ruler to line up my marks at the top to the marks at the bottom. And once again, create very light lines. So now I have a 1-inch grid on my 9x12 drawing paper. Again, those lines should be light so that they are easily erased later on in the process of our drawing. So when making a grid on our drawing paper, no matter the size, just check to see what the required grid size is. We usually work with a 1-inch grid. So no matter if my paper is as small as 8.5 by 11, is 9 by 12, 11 by 14, 12 by 18, doesn't matter. I'm going to always follow the same process of lining up the left edge of the ruler, the zero of the ruler to the left edge of the paper, make my marks at 1 inch until I come to the end of the paper or to the very last full inch I can make. Move my ruler to the bottom of the paper, repeat that process. Draw my lines very light by lining up the ruler between the top and bottom marks. And then rotate my paper so that it is in the other orientation from where I started. And again, go through the same process. At the top, line up my zero to the left edge, make a mark every 1 inch until I come to my very last full inch on the paper. Move the ruler to the bottom and again line up the ruler zero to the left edge and again make 1 inch marks until I come to the very last full 1 inch mark I can make. And the same process. Top mark gets lined up to the bottom mark with the ruler and very light lines are applied. So that is the process we will use when creating a grid with any of our projects in our drawing paper, canvas, whatever we are working with.